Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. We're thrilled to have you all here today as we talk about design systems. My name is Kevin Wong, my pronouns are he and him, and I'm the Director of Design and Lead Product Design at Webflow. And joining me today, I'm going to have the pleasure of having Michelle Leon and Kevin Grennan, who are from our product and design team, to share their insights about all the work that went into today. So please help me welcome them. All right, Michelle, Kevin, thank you for being here. Both of you look amazing today. So let's get started with some introductions. Michelle, could you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a product manager here at Webflow. I work on our foundation and infrastructure teams, which includes both our very own internal design system, as well as leading some of the teams that worked on the features that Vlad mentioned earlier today about bringing design systems functionality to Webflow, like components and variables. A little bit about me in my free time. So actually, I'm an engineer by trade. And in my spare time, I love to tinker around with side projects. Something that has really amazed me in the past few years is just seeing the incredible explosion of frameworks and component libraries and tools that make it so much easier to get started building amazing experiences for the web. So big fan of things like ShadCN UI, Tailwind CSS, and excited about bringing some of those powers to Webflow customers too.
Amazing. And you mentioned you work on our own design system. Big day today, right?
Yes, big day today. So we all just saw Vlad revealed our new look and feel for both our brand and the product. And so actually, as part of our work, Kevin and I both led some of the teams that work on our own internal design system that led the visual refresh of our designer and dashboard products. So what this kind of means is that we both know firsthand how beneficial it can be to have a robust internal design system in taking on a large-scale project such as a brand and visual refresh, and just the benefits to scale and consistency and really just the speed and ease at which you're able to take on this kind of massive, complex undertaking. It also means that we also know how painful that day-to-day development can be when you don't have some of those components and tokens already set up, especially when we're working in some of the more legacy parts of our code base.
Well, thank you. I just want to say thank you from me and to the team. I know seeing firsthand all the work that went into it, it was really inspiring. And so I know we're all excited to have the community try it out. And so turning to Kevin, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Kevin. My pronouns are he, him. And I'm a product designer on our foundation team here at Webflow, working with Michelle every day. And I also led a lot of the design efforts of our external and user-facing design system features like components and variables that we saw earlier. I spent my whole career working on design systems and implementing design systems, including implementing the earliest version of material design at Google on Google Maps, and also implementing the first version of Airbnb's design system, and particularly fine-tuning it for their hosts. And within Webflow, I'm a strong advocate for our design system and really have been super impressed by the way in which a really well-implemented design system helps with the communication between design and engineering. So having a design system implemented really well in Figma and really well in code just makes everything work so much better. And like Michelle, I also have some side projects and hobbies, but my hobby is eating the best pineapple pizza in the city. I'm a lifelong advocate of pineapple pizza. If you see me around later, I can recommend you my top 5 in the city.
All right, hear, hear. We'll definitely share a common language about pineapple pairing perfectly on pizza. And so earlier today, Vlad talked about a lot of amazing new launches about how we're improving the way we design and develop websites at Webflow, or with Webflow, including variables, components, and the new Figma to Webflow app. Can you tell us about why we prioritize this work?
Well, I think the number one reason is that you all asked for it. These design system features are probably the most requested set of features after localization, and you just saw Carla and Brett talk about that. So as we're seeing Webflow advance and grow, we're also seeing our community advance and grow, and we're seeing the types of sites you're building become more and more complex and larger. And we're also seeing the teams you work on become more diverse and more distributed. And so when we see situations like that, we see that those sites are more time-consuming and more difficult to build, and those teams are more difficult to work within. We also see many of our customers building multiple sites for the same brand within Webflow, or maybe multiple sub-brands. And in situations like that, if you're having to recreate and redefine the same design system primitives, like variables and components, again and again, that's really frustrating. You really want to be able to use those same things across multiple sites or across an entire large site. We also see that, that same problem causes and can cause a lack of consistency, both in the build phase and also as the site lives out in the world and your design changes over time. It's really hard to maintain those things if you don't have a strong foundations of design system primitives. So in summary, it's really about speed. We see that great variables and components can increase the speed at which you build sites and also helping you build and maintain sites and keep consistency over time.
I love it, and I love that we're learning from our community and this focus on speed and scale. We're also seeing the industry as a whole adopting and leveraging design systems in way more sophisticated ways. So how does Webflow fit into this picture?
Yes, so that's a great question, and I think that we're really seeing the industry evolve in kind of like two different ways, both in the worlds of web development and in the world of design tooling. So in the world of web development, what we've seen folks really embrace is things like React, like CSS variables, basically evolving the primitives of web development to be much more reusable, modular, composable, and really just seeing a growth of these like component-based frameworks that bring a lot more power and flexibility to building experiences for the web. And then, in the other hand, in the world of design tooling, we've seen like the community really embrace things like design tokens. So basically, like reusable values that really help to speed up the design and prototyping phases of the product development process. These are the types of things that tools like Figma, for example, they're really good at. We're seeing them lean into it. In fact, actually, a lot of Webflow customers, we see them sort of start off their journey. They'll design in Figma and then build in Webflow. And so I'm talking about these primitives evolving in the world of web development and design tooling. And while they share a lot of similarities, there's always kind of this translation step. So I think, Kev, you mentioned earlier like this common language between designers and engineers. And that's really what design systems brings. And also this translation and upkeep step between the worlds of design and bringing those concepts to life in production, it causes a lot of friction. And that's actually the problem that Webflow set out to solve 10 years ago. For folks who are Webflow OGs, they might remember the CSS playground. So this was like 10 years ago, quite novel at the time, basically visually style and design, and then under the hood, actually be writing CSS, like production-grade real code. Since then, we've learned that we're still quite far from solving this problem, this friction between like translating from design to production. We're seeing that folks are now designing across multiple platforms. We're seeing that people are working in more distributed and diverse teams with lots of cross-functional collaborators. We're seeing folks take on larger and more complex builds. And so really, this sort of friction and complexity has almost exploded. And so we really see that embracing design systems is the natural evolution of Webflow's platform. Because kind of just staying true to our mission, we're trying to empower and make it super easy for designers to transform their designs to code in a reusable system that scales, and that is ultimately, I think, where we have a lot more room to run, and really excited to just be at the beginning of that journey.
Right. Thank you for that. And I think it's essential that we consider the fundamentals of design at the core of our development process. And Webflow has always been at this intersection of design and development, and these two practices really converging in many ways. And we're in this unique position to really help empower the whole community at this intersection. It's an exciting and ambitious mission. So I got to ask, where do you start with something like that?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. And I think the short answer is that we started with our customers. And I think a longer answer is that we sort of started looking at our mission, and we went back to our mission, which is to bring developer superpowers to everyone. And that everyone is really important, because when we look across our customer base, we see all these different ways of using Webflow to create different types of highly complex sites and different types of teams. So when we look at our really larger enterprise customers, customers like NCR that do payment solutions, and Lattice, the HR platform, we see them building in large or multiple sites in pretty large teams. They often have pretty sophisticated and mature design systems that they're using to power both their Webflow sites and also other properties and assets they have. And we also see them working with their own in-house software engineers to create special integrations into Webflow. And that's pretty powerful and pretty unique. We also see other types of customers who are building entire components, entire systems, entire pages, or even their entire site in Figma before bringing it into Webflow and then recreating it. We see many of our agencies kickstarting a really fine-tuned, repeatable process by duplicating their existing assets, whether those are design system in Figma or a site in Webflow. And across the entire gamut of our customer base, we see people utilizing our wonderful marketplace assets. So whether that's taking a template or a clonable or using one of our UI libraries, and we see people really like going to town, customizing those, creating really sophisticated, unique solutions using those underlying assets. So in short, there's tons of different ways to work with Webflow. And when we thought about design systems, we didn't want to like force you to use this new way or to change the way you work. So we really focused in our first launch here to create simple primitives that anyone can integrate into their existing way of working and find really great value and great acceleration in your workflow by using these.
Yeah, Kevin, actually, I'm so glad you mentioned that because I think you just touched on one of the product development principles that we were using as we went through this process of figuring out how to evolve our platform to embrace some of these concepts. So just to kind of give folks some insight, we think through really 3 principles as we were building out some of these features and kind of found ourselves continuing to come back to these and wrestling through them day to day. So the first is that on the front end, it's super important that we're building an interface that's intuitive for designers. So that's the first piece. The second is that on the back end, it's super important that Webflow continues to output production-grade code, meaning that under the hood, we're using best-in-class development frameworks. It means that we really care about things like optimizing CSS and JavaScript for published site performance. And so I think that there's like this interesting balance between, OK, we want to make sure there's something that's an intuitive, elegant interface, but also making sure that it's like, at the end of the day, it's a pro tool building production websites. And then finally, and then Kevin, this is what you were just touching on, and I think it's actually probably the most important principle, is around flexibility. And that is that new features and these new primitives that we're introducing or evolving in some cases needs to fit within your existing workflows. And so that means that things like interoperability both with the other features of the Webflow platform, as well as interoperability with the broader ecosystem of tools that you may be using, is super important. And so these 3 principles, they're really the ones that we kept coming back to. These are the ones that we're working through every day. And yeah, just wanted to give a little bit of insight into how we think about building some of these features.
Thank you both. And OK, so what about teams who already have a design system? How can they benefit from what we launched today?
Yeah, well, if you already have a design system, you've probably got it pretty well documented and built out in Figma, or you may even have implemented in code as well. And your Webflow site or sites may be just one of many properties that you're using this design system with. So when we went about building our new variables feature and updating components, we really went about understanding the industry standards and trying to map to those as much as possible. So using our tooling like DevLink and our Figma to Webflow plugin, you'll be able to pull in those resources smoothly into Webflow because we respected those industry standards as much as possible. So another example, when you think about the Figma to Webflow plugin in more detail, last year we launched that, and it sort of allowed you to kind of copy and paste those components from Figma into Webflow. This year, with the new update coming next month, you'll actually be able to sync those components from Figma into Webflow. So that's it makes a big difference because it means you're not just using that in the build phase, but as you're iterating on the designs and as you're maintaining those designs, that sync will continue to work. So you don't have to go into Webflow and hunt for every single instance of a component or a variable. Once you do that sync, all of those will update automatically. So it makes it way more powerful than it was before.
Awesome. And it sounds like this would be especially beneficial for people who have many sites under the same company. Is that right?
Yeah, so for those larger enterprises that are operating multiple sites in Webflow or multiple sites for sub-brands within Webflow, you can actually use that Figma to Webflow tool as a sort of source of truth. So you can create a single sophisticated design system within Figma, and then by using that sync, you can sync it separately into multiple different Webflow sites. So that allows you to keep a whole lot of consistency in place. And we're aware that this is not a totally smooth process yet. It's still in the nascent stages, and we'll be investing more resources in updating and improving that sync experience from Figma to Webflow over the coming months and years. But we're also working on our own native solution for that within Webflow itself. So we're working on a solution to allow you to create a set of variables and components within a single Webflow site and use those across multiple sites within a single workspace. So that's going to be really powerful.
Awesome. I see many examples like this everywhere. My dentist has a website, and he's part of a bigger company. They have all these offices locally that have their own websites, and I know that they rely on components like shared nav, a footer, some pricing cards, and a booking flow. And so now, what about customers who don't have multiple sites and who are just getting started?
Yeah, I guess I can take that because I think what's interesting is that design systems, they're definitely not only for use at this super large scale. They're useful at whatever stage you are, maybe in the design or development journey, whether or not it's you're just getting started, so maybe providing like that scaffolding, that jumping off point, and foundation from which you can start to evolve your designs. The second, and I think this is actually really interesting because Webflow sort of brings these mediums of design and development into a single medium. And so what I mean by that, and I'll use a real example. Imagine you're a startup, you're launching your brand out of stealth. Maybe you haven't finalized your brand guidelines yet, but you want to get started building out the new landing pages and assets. And so you can get started building those out, wiring everything up with variables as that foundation. And then later, as your brand guidelines get finalized, maybe you figured out your typography, you figured out your color palette, you can actually just make those changes once by managing your variables, and then actually see those changes cascade across your site, across all your assets, preview it in production. And then even if it's still not finalized at this point, you can almost like use this preview as an input back into the creative process to continue to tweak and almost see like, in production itself, see the changes that you're making and continue to refine and iterate on the designs. And so this is like a much more agile and collaborative process, I think, than some of the at-scale processes that Kevin just mentioned, where like maybe there's like a more traditional design to development handoff and there's like multiple teams involved. But I think it's definitely like just using these same concept of reusability and these primitives is still super powerful and useful even at a smaller scale.
Yeah, we're also seeing some of these, our community sharing useful assets with variables and design systems, right?
Yes, and so I think actually maybe a couple of those got mentioned earlier. We're definitely seeing already clonables with variables wired up pop up in the marketplace already. Excited to see what more is to come there. I think I mentioned earlier that I'm a big fan of frameworks like Tailwind. And the reason is because I think what this does is not just make like development in CSS like much more approachable, but actually what it enables you to do is almost like supercharge development by providing those guardrails and best practices from which you can evolve. And so what I'm really excited about is seeing more of the power of these types of frameworks that maybe were previously more limited to either like a code-based development environment or maybe the implementations within like Webflow were slightly less successful. I'm really excited now about seeing just like what the community comes up with, what everyone's creative minds comes up with, bringing more of the power of these best practices and guidelines to Webflow.
Awesome. And so Vlad and Brian earlier today talked about Figma to Webflow and DevLink. Can we expect to see any more native integrations coming from the team?
Yes. So Figma to Webflow and DevLink, they're both actually built by Webflow Labs. So if folks who might not be familiar with Webflow Labs, it's the incubation arm of Webflow that kind of builds out products that augment Webflow's core product experience. And so both Figma to Webflow and DevLink, they were actually built by dog fooding our APIs. And so those very same APIs for components and variables, we're now making available today for any developer to build new apps and extensions with. So I would almost pose that question back to the community, which is, what are you all going to build? There's so many opportunities ahead of us.
I agree. We have an incredible community. Well, Michelle, Kevin, I enjoyed catching up with you today. And also, I'm just so excited for everybody here to try out all of the new capabilities that we launched and everyone to try them out. Thank you both for sharing your insights into how we're building products here at Webflow and what we can expect to see soon. The transparency is genuinely appreciated. So as we wrap up, can each of you just share one last closing thought for the audience?
I can go first, I guess. Last closing thoughts. I guess I would say that really the teams have been so hard at work for the past many, many months to bring a lot of these features to life. And just we're really so excited to have it now out there in the hands of you all and just excited to continue to evolve the platform alongside everyone else.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's really something I spoke about earlier, but it's regardless of how you use Webflow or how you work or what your source of truth is, we want to make sure our design system features fit with your workflow. So let us know how we're doing.
Awesome. Thank you again. And this concludes our session on supercharging web development with design systems. If you see us, please say hi. Let us know what you think. And to everyone who's tuning in live, virtually, thank you again for joining us from all around the world. It's been our pleasure to host this session. My name is Kevin. Thanks again. Give a round of applause for Michelle and Kevin and the entire team behind all the updates today.